What does following your inner knowing actually look like? Today's episode is about trusting yourself, and in that process, transforming your family and the world. I'll share the story of moving from being a Kaiser pediatrician for 20 years to being a retreat leader of 38 retreats and the coach of hundreds, thousands of clients, and becoming a TEDx and keynote speaker. I get asked all the time, how did I get from there to here? So today's episode is another version of that story with some key points and reflections at this point. Thanks for joining us today at the Healing Medicine Podcast. Who are you listening to? I am Dr. Jessie Mahoney, and my co-host is Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang. We are two board-certified physicians who bring decades of experience to the conversation about wellness. If you crave more ease and aspire to rediscover your love for medicine and life, one mindful step at a time, you are in the right place. We hope you'll love today's episode, and if so, please share it. A reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice. Welcome to today's episode, What Following Your Knowing Actually Looks Like. And while it's a story, it is much, much more than a story. I am hoping to share with all of you what becomes possible when you trust yourself and how the trust in yourself can transform the people around you in ways that you did not see coming. And how all the turns and the signs and the ripple effects transpire and impact, and what can happen when you keep following your inner knowing, even when that path doesn't exist yet in your own mind or out there in the world at all. So why am I choosing to share this episode today, and why now? Number one, I shared this at a retreat that was ending yesterday. Our podcast queue is empty. And so tomorrow, this podcast will be releasing, and we're due for a podcast. And so I have had lists of things that I wanted to share, and this was on that list. And this was on that list because of an interview I did a few weeks ago with a dear friend, as well as the woman who supports me as a coach when I need coaching. And when she interviewed me, she has a brand new podcast. And so I did an interview with her to help her kick off her podcast. And when she asked me questions, I heard myself share things that I haven't shared before, and parts of the story that hadn't really become clear. I love when someone asks you questions in a different way, and paths and in knowings become clear, things that you weren't able to see yourself, when someone is a mirror or someone helps you ask good questions. And that's literally what a coach does, what a talented coach does, who's experienced. They allow things to come to the surface that you weren't aware of. And with that awareness, it actually allows you to make more aligned shifts from a place of integrity. So there are a couple of through lines that are going to come through this episode, which are the things that I really realized in this conversation that I felt were worth sharing, because I don't know that a story on its own is worth, all stories are wonderful, and I'm really enjoying storytelling, as many of you know, and listening to stories, and this whole arena of creativity and an art that I wasn't aware of. But stories on their own aren't really an impactful story unless they have a message or a through line. And so it's sort of what you have learned, and you can share that in a story under the redwoods in a certain format, or you can share that in a podcast. And some of the learnings from this story, because this is a podcast where we share learnings, and the people who listen to it not just to be entertained, but also to learn and grow and transform. The same reasons that they come to a retreat, not just to relax, but to grow and learn and transform. And the same reasons that they come to coaching. And so the first big bit of wisdom that I want to talk about is trusting your inner knowing. And that's why I gave the title of the podcast that, and how one follows it. And what I discovered as I shared my story again is that every turn in my story was an act of trust. And while I had been trained to not trust in medicine, and it took a lot of work through my own coaching and through mindfulness and through yoga teacher training and through living, but I made a decision to trust myself, to follow my inner knowing. And we'll talk a bit about what that looks like. But every turn that I took was an act of trust. Leaving Kaiser was an absolute act of trust. I'm not independently wealthy. I did still have to have a job. I hadn't reached financial independence. It was an act of trust that I could figure it out and that I had something within me to bring to the world that the world needed. And many of you say, well, how do I get that trust? And my invitation is you grow it. You might borrow someone else's belief in you. You might look for spaces where you have made good decisions and recognize how you are trustworthy. And we'll talk a bit more about that. Building pause and presence was a complete act of trust in myself, trust in this inner wisdom and this way of putting things together that I could see in my mind and in my heart that I knew was really the answer and something that was not out there anywhere else. But I had to trust that. I had to believe that it was an answer that people would resonate with, that would help them, and that would, because it was important to me, make the world a better place or change the world, at least in my small arena. And I do believe that happened, but it would not have happened if I hadn't trusted myself. Choosing Nicasio Creek Farm, leaving my house of 20 years and the city I'd lived in for 30 years, and was taking a huge risk. And it was an act of trust, a trust that, Mark and I could do this together and that we could transform a space that was not used for this before, that it was the perfect space and that we could do it. And I would also say there was an inner knowing trust when I arrived here that this was the space. Simple as that. Choosing to work with Mark, which I've talked about recently, was also an act of trust. And choosing to give a TED Talk, also an act of trust. And choosing to give these talks and work with national organizations, an act of trust. Choosing to do some new work, which I'll be sharing soon with institutions and teams, really just sharing because I like to offer the possibility, also an act of trust that I was in a space where I was willing to go back and offer things, not just to individuals, which is where I've really leaned in and loved, but offering things on a national scale and then also in person in local medical institutions, or not just local, but places I'll travel to. And each piece of this was built on trust. It was also built on the trust that came from the first thing having worked out, and or maybe it didn't work out in the first round, but I was able to navigate it such that it worked out. And I think if most of you pause and reflect, you have done the same thing. So the second piece of wisdom that's going to be a thread through this whole podcast is that what you model is far more powerful than what you say. And I think that one of the reasons that my story has, I won't even say unraveled, but transpired or happened the way that it did, is because I am a product of my product. I model the ways of moving through the world that I offer. I model the possibility of practicing medicine with a different mindset, which is what I did before I shifted to doing this. I model not running away, but moving towards something. And the other thing that is so powerful about this is so many people worry about making a change because of the risk, because they don't know how it will turn out, because of the uncertainty. And many people are worried about the impact on others, their family, their finances, that maybe it's selfish to stop doing what they're doing. And what I would offer is that the biggest effect on all of this and the biggest positive effect has actually, equal positive effect has been on my family. What I did not expect at all was that my choices had a huge positive impact on the people around me that I love. And that when I made a decision to show up as the best version of me, rather than just a pretty good version of me, my husband, my kids, my grandkids, my clients, the people who come to retreats, they all benefited tremendously. And so very often when we're about to make a shift, we are so worried about how it will impact other people. Will my kids suffer if their parents take a risk? Will my kids have less opportunity if I take a financial risk? Will I be modeling not following through or not sticking with something? And instead, modeling going after your dreams and rerouting along the way and learning and trusting yourself is an incredibly powerful effect. And I will talk about that towards the end of the podcast. But it has been one of the biggest gifts of this journey that I want to offer at the outset for many of you, because I hear so much hesitation around that. And so it is possible that it will have wildly impactful effects that you never thought possible. And the last bit that I want to offer as an introduction to some of the detailed concepts that I'm going to run through is that life on the other side of these big shifts and transformations and transitions, and just a willingness to shift and change. Sometimes we just change our mindset and stay where we are. And for many people I work with, that is what happens. They shift their mindset. They use these same tools, trusting themselves and modeling what they believe in, and where they are becomes amazing, because many of you worked very hard to get to a place where you are, and it's actually pretty amazing. We are trained to notice how it's not. But when you are willing to work with your mindset and work with your approach, where you are can be amazing. And if you make the shifts and it's not amazing, then you can make a shift. Or then you might be able to believe in and build something that you never even imagined possible. So, as we dive in, also just going to acknowledge that this podcast is a solo cast, and I love working with my co-host Ni Chang, and I also love the fact that occasionally we do solo casts when either the other one is not available or we find ourselves in the spot where we need an episode for tomorrow. And that some of our most listened to episodes end up being those solo casts. And Ni Chang has done some as well, and I imagine she'll do some in the future. But today is going to be just me. So one of the questions that I was asked was where the name Pause and Presence came from. And I'm not sure that this is a story that I've told before, and it's actually quite important because what I teach is actually pause and presence. And someone in their retreat feedback yesterday as we were talking said that that is what this retreat offers, but pause and presence itself and the retreat offers so much more than that. And so where the name come from is, oftentimes we're thinking, I need a name for what I'm going to do. And that is what I was thinking. But it didn't come from this place of pushing and how am I going to brainstorm the names and what am I going to do? As many of you know, your best ideas come in the shower or on a walk or on a mountaintop. They come when you are in a parasympathetic state. And that is where the pause and presence name came from. Mine literally came in a rainstorm, which is similar to a shower on a tropical island. I was in Hawaii with Mark on my very first week of my sabbatical, my pause. I hadn't made a decision as to what I was going to do moving forward, but for whatever reason, on this hike in a rainstorm, we were on the island of Hawaii where it rains all the time. I actually hadn't been to the island of Hawaii to the wet side before, so part of me said, why did I choose to do this? I didn't realize that's what I was doing. And yet I got so much out of it being very different than what I had imagined. So literally in this rainstorm, those words came to me. Literally, I said, it's going to be called pause and presence. And Mark was like, what? Why? And so the good stuff really does come when you're not forcing it, and when you're literally pausing and being present. And so the idea with pausing is that pausing creates space to see what's next. And so it's slowing down and creating micro pauses. It's taking micro pauses in your day. It's the pause to unwind the nervous system. Only in the pause can you have clarity and can you access your inner knowing. And it could be the micro pause, it could be the macro pause. But when you are not in the pause and you're just pushing and plowing forward, we don't have clarity. We're not making decisions with intention or alignment. We're literally reacting. So if you don't have a pause, you react rather than respond. And beyond responding is something that I've really been working with people on. We start in medicine as reactive, then we get to responding on purpose, but we can also get to proactive and who we want to be and that planning. And that all can only happen in the pause. But you can have the pause and you cannot be present. You can just literally be in the pause, just sort of floating or not having a specific intention. And so when you are actually present, you also can make decisions and be actually in your body. Embodied is the word I like to say. And so presence is being fully embodied. Many of you hear me say in yoga, the idea of dropping into your body. That is presence. And if we don't drop into our body, we can't access our inner knowing. But you can't be present if you're not pausing to some degree. Presence is also where the joy is found and where connection is found. And so many women in medicine are desperate for joy in their lives and connection. They're missing the fun. They feel disconnected from either their work, their passion, their purpose, their loved ones. We often feel disconnected even in these spaces where there are lots of people, even when we're on vacation, because we're disconnected to ourselves. And so present is being fully embodied. It's being connected to yourself. I also like to think of presence. Presence means that you're not looking ahead and planning ahead, and you're not looking behind you and regretting. You're literally gathering information in the moment. And that's where you can access your inner wisdom. I also liken presence is a little bit like being a permeable membrane, letting yourself be and interact with the world without an agenda. Now, I don't recommend just sitting, being present in all spaces, in a safe space. And so without the presence, you don't actually get the intentional transformation either. Here you get the reaction and an outcome, but it's not necessarily an intentional outcome. And so without the pause and without the presence, you just get what you get. And with the pause and the presence, that's the foundation of everything I do. And that is the foundation of how you live and love intentionally, how you get to live and love in a life and a world that you actually want to be in. And many of us are actually already in that world and already in those spaces and already have the tools and the people, but without pausing and being present, you miss it. So that's how the name came. It's also how I live. And many people say, if you learn from marketing people, what's your technique or your methodology? And I do kind of have a methodology. It didn't evolve that way. It's just looking back at what I do, there's information there. But it's really like how I live, how I coach, how I make decisions, and what I model. And in that process of doing that, I can share how I do that. But it comes, the root of it, the foundation of it is presence. So I think that is relevant to anyone who's thinking about how to trust their inner knowing, whether to trust their inner knowing, how to access it if they haven't been able to. And also it's essential, critical, the foundation of transformation. So the next piece that I want to talk about in my story, how I went from there to here, or here to how I got there, which was where I am now is where many of you would like to get to. But actually I'm here, right? So how I got from there, where I was at one point, to here, how I've made the shifts and what was the process. Because recognizing, rather than looking at it and compare and despairing, think about the process. We want to know the how, and I always tell people you can't know the how until you get there. But you can be strategic and intentional about your process, and you can set yourself up for success. And so pausing and being present is number one. The number two thing that I wanted to share today is this idea of working backwards from feelings. And those of you who have worked with me as a coach and worked with me at retreats know that I always say I coach from the feeling line. And for many people like me, I'm a feeling person. I feel things, but I don't necessarily have the rational explanation in my mind about why I feel them. But it's the feeling that is how I make my decisions. So, before I did this work, I made a lot of decisions from fear, guilt, blame, shame. And now I really think about, okay, well, how do I want to feel? And starting to make decisions that way. And so when I work with people, I always ask them, well, how do you feel now? How do you want to feel? Most of us have never even thought about how we want to feel. Or I really was jealous of someone who talked about how, not a physician, how they felt proud every day. And I thought, wow, I don't feel proud. How come I don't feel proud? Well, one, I hadn't aspired to feel proud. I hadn't really ever thought about feeling proud. And I realized I had a lot of noise about being proud and was proud, egotistical or arrogant or complacent or, sometimes we talk about people who are proud in negative ways. But being proud of who you are is equivalent to integrity. And I've done a whole podcast on that. So I encourage you to go back and look at that and listen to that as well. But what I find is when we know, most of us know how we want to feel. We don't know the job title. We don't know where we're going to live. We don't know exactly what it looks like, but we might know we want a life that's more easeful, or we might know we want to feel more content. And I would offer to put a more in front. So this is not an all or none. It's not a perfectionist path. But I really went from how I wanted to feel in my life. And I wanted to feel alive. And for others of you, the word might feel like joy or happiness or engaged or connected. To me, alive encompasses all of those things. What I realized is that my life was fine, but I didn't feel jazzed up, inspired, alive, the tingles. And alive, by the way, has the ups and downs, right? The EKG has the big swing. So alive is not all amazing, which is actually probably unreasonable or unrealistic. But I wanted to feel like I was really living to my fullest potential. And that includes, honestly, all the ups and downs. We don't get the good without the challenging. And so I offer to you that many of you very likely know how you want to feel, even though you have no idea what the outcome is. You don't know, you maybe know you don't want to be where you are, but you have no idea what the perfect job, or do you want to move, or do you want to whatever. And so the thought is, when you work from feelings, you can make little decisions along the way, bigger decisions along the way. You can experiment and say, am I getting closer and am I getting farther? And so it's a great tool. And sometimes the feeling that you want is actually not really possible in your life right now. And then you can pick some interim feelings. And I do want to offer that I think that the feeling choosing, while it sounds easy, is actually quite challenging. And it takes a lot of nuance and a lot of practice. And it's something that I really work with people on intensely in coaching, because if you pick a feeling that you don't really want, or you get it off, you end up somewhere you don't really want to be. And so it's one of these things that's like a constant refinement. And we have done several episodes in this podcast about feelings for the year, and spending time really massaging those and noodling on those, and having them be specific. And sometimes they're even a made-up word. I love to make up words that mean the thing that you really want to feel, because sometimes the English language doesn't have them. And compromising here is not worthwhile if you know how you want to feel. And many of us have felt that way at different times in our lives. So that's also, if you know what that feeling feels like, you can work towards it, even if it doesn't have a name, but it's helpful to give it some kind of name where you know what it means. So I encourage you to think about how you really want to feel in life. I also encourage you to join me for a retreat or coaching where I can help you with this, because to me, this is the absolute key behind transforming into something you actually want to transform to, transforming your life into something that's truly meaningful for you. Because how I want to feel, even if I use the word alive, there was someone who came to a retreat this week, and that word really resonated with her. But what it feels alive in my body is going to feel different than what feels alive to her. And so this is where the personalization is so important. So the key here is also understanding how you feel in the present moment and actually being aware of it. And in medicine, we were taught not to feel, so many of us aren't really aware. And so it's taking time to really sit with that present awareness, which comes through mindfulness, comes through yoga, comes through coaching, comes through reflection and exploration, and is really helpful with a guide, because I find from so many people that they really struggle with feelings. And while I would say I was a feeling person, I hadn't really identified the feelings. And the more specific you can be, the better, because it gives you so many clues. And even if all you know in the beginning is, I want to feel not this feeling I have, or that this feeling I have is uncomfortable, that can also help guide you. And so when I started, the feeling that I had was not burnt out, exhaustion, tired to the bone. I had done enough work that where I was fine. But I felt disconnected. I felt like I had lost my zest for life. I would spend a lot of time looking in the past, looking in the future, noticing what was wrong because we were trained to do that, and noticing what I needed to fix and prevent. But I had also tidied up most of that, and I still felt disconnected and not, like I often say, one of my words for the year a few years ago was truly living, which is alive. And so everything that I have built for myself and for others comes from the root of the desire to feel alive. And so hopefully that explanation just sparks your curiosity, your interest, and think about, how do you feel most of the time? How do you want to feel most of the time? And don't just set, okay, I'm going to feel this way. Make sure that there's something you can feel. There's often a lot of stepping stones, step ladders, things like that to get there. And again, while this sounds easy, boy, is it not. So the next part I want to talk about is sort of the turning point, is what I called it as I was sketching this out. And this was in 2017, maybe to 2019. I had been at Kaiser for 20 years. I was a practicing pediatrician with a bustling practice and super high patient satisfaction scores. And I was not burnt out or in distress. I just didn't feel alive. I had been a physician leader in God knows how many physician leader roles. As I mentioned before, I was a junkie. And that's because I was a fixer. I wanted to make things better for people, for my colleagues, for the patients, for the next generation. That's the pediatrician mindset. I was also the chief of physician wellness for almost my whole career. So I was accomplishing all the things on paper. My CV looked amazing. I was successful on the surface. But I wasn't having fun. I felt this sort of gnawing discomfort, sense of dissatisfaction, but it wasn't like extreme distress. It also wasn't enough to get me to make a change. What I realize now is the catalyst to make a change was actually the distress in my husband and his significant mental health crisis. And very often in medicine, most of us are only willing to make a change when we see someone else we love suffering. And while he wasn't necessarily suffering because of my choices or because of my job, in fact, I think he was benefiting greatly from all of those things, suffering in someone you love is sort of a wake-up call. And I didn't want that to happen to me and have my situation impact other people. Would it have happened? I have no idea. But it's very often someone you love's crisis that's a catalyst for your own change. And interestingly, I made the change well in advance of him making the change. It was a catalyst for me that I had to take care of myself and be responsible for my own life, and that all I could do was that. And in doing so, it turns out that my decisions had a huge ripple effect, but that wasn't why I did them. I did them to help myself feel alive and to help others feel alive, which I realize ultimately is sort of my passion in this world. So I started with by working with a coach. And I waited too long because I also actually really started by trying to do it myself for the first couple of years. And I knew about coaching as someone who had been in wellness, and it wasn't a thing in physicians, but I was always researching and learning in that area. And I knew this was a thing. And so I hired a coach despite tremendous discomfort and a lot of skepticism. I just felt like I got to do something. So I'm going to try this. I had no idea what I was really looking for or how it could help me. But what I found is that well before the end of it, I had a lot of clarity. And it was really inner knowing clarity, but it allowed me to access that. And the coach that I worked with was not a physician. She was married to a physician, so I thought maybe she would understand, but I actually chose her very specifically because she was not in healthcare, and I wanted an outside non-healthcare perspective to weave into my own healthcare perspective to sort of see how I could work through it. So by the end of my own one-on-one coaching, in less than 6 months, I had signed up and completed yoga teacher training, and I had signed up for coach training. Both of those I didn't do because I was like, oh, I'm going to teach yoga, or oh, I'm going to become a coach. Excuse me. I did those because I really wanted to learn and was interested. And these tools had helped me tremendously. And this whole thing of coaching, I thought, wow, like I want to understand this, because the way that I experienced it, there were things that worked as a physician and things that didn't work, and I could take it or leave it. And even when I did coach training, there are things in coach training that don't work for physicians. And so what I do now is actually not at all strictly coaching. It weaves together a lot of other things, but I wanted to understand it and learn it because I thought it would inform my role as a physician wellness lead, and it would certainly inform my life, both yoga teacher training and coach training. I mean, they've helped infinite numbers of other people, but they also really helped me. I learned a ton about myself. They're kind of an immersion that I don't think you need, but there wasn't anywhere out there in the world at that time where there wasn't anybody like me who blended all these things together, who understood medicine. And so to me, it was learning and acquiring tools. And that's a tool I've always used, giving myself permission without obligation. So I also just love learning and growing. And so I gave myself permission to do it and see what happened. And at that time, I always want to reiterate, I didn't do either of those because I was going to leave medicine. I didn't do either of those because I was going to do them. And very often, if you could just follow your nose, follow your inner wisdom, it can help guide you. And this was also the first time in a very long time I had kind of followed my nose and veered off the usual prescribed path. Now, I had been to integrative medicine conferences. I had done, looked at functional medicine and looked at other things, but I never actually veered off the path to say that I was going to get trained in something. The only time that maybe I'd really veered off the path, I took 2 years off before I went to med school, but I worked in child abuse, not to get into medical school, but because I wanted to take a pause. And I was also waiting for Mark, who's younger, to finish college so we could end up going to the same place. But the only other time maybe I stepped off the treadmill was having kids in medical school. But again, I am someone who had pretty much followed the path, the prescribed right path, as well as someone who grew up in Berkeley could. But what I would say is when you are willing and open to step into possibility, which was that sort of 2017 to 2019 situation, you start looking for magic and wonder, and you start looking for all the things that make you feel alive. When you pause, when you're present, and when you make decisions from that space, which is how I had ended up in yoga teacher training and coach training. Not because I had any expectations whatsoever. They really were an exploration of magic and wonder and things that make you feel alive. And when you're looking for it, it shows up. So in 2019, I took my sabbatical, not knowing whether I was going to go back or not. And by the way, my sabbatical was just using up a time that I had accrued over working there for 20 years. I had a lot of banked time, and they actually wanted you to use it. I did have to plan ahead almost a year to make it happen. So it was about the time I finished my own coaching that I started working on this. So a year in, I started doing this, and I made a decision to resign while I was off because of this idea that I couldn't not do it. It wasn't that I wasn't running away from something, I was moving towards something. I had this inner nudge, this inner knowing. And I always like to tell people I did not have a full-on plan. And like any good doctor, I had tons of backup plans. I was going to do pediatric per diem on the weekends for urgent care. I was going to work with a friend in a small private practice, family practice, who wanted some pediatric support. And then COVID came. I didn't know that the pandemic was coming. I resigned in January of 2020, end of January. And I had, you have to give a certain amount of notice. And so, since I was still using my accrued time off, I used the rest of that as my notice. And, one of the reasons I did that, and not everyone knows this, but at that time, Kaiser had a policy that you could not do anything else. So I had to make a choice. So early on, I told a very negative story about having to make a choice. And also, a negative story about the pandemic too. But in retrospect, both of those things were fantabulous gifts that I didn't know about and hadn't planned for. An example of how things can turn out better than you expect. So this policy actually got me to do the thing I really deeply wanted to do. And it made it such that I had to jump off the diving board into the cold water. And without that, I might not have done it, or I might have done it little piecemeal here, little piecemeal there, and I certainly wouldn't be where I was today. COVID similarly eliminated all those backup plans. And right quick, like 2 weeks after my official resignation and my last paycheck, COVID showed up. And so all those per diem shifts, it vanished. And I did still have the possibility to help a friend, but it was a very strange way to start sort of a new micro practice in the midst of COVID in a spacesuit in the backyard, seeing newborns. And so instead, I decided to go all in on my coaching. And that's a tool that I call making your decision the right decision. Having your own back, not saying, oh my God, I made this terrible mistake, which is our tendency. And so again, that's trusting your inner knowing. I made this decision for a good reason. I couldn't possibly have known that all these things were going to happen. And here we are. And so it must be a good decision. So I'm going to lean in and make it the best decision. It gives you courage to try things you might not have, and permission. And so for me, both of those things turned out to be a good thing. They could have gone either way. I decided from that point to make decisions from trust and inner knowing, and from belief it was going to work out, and belief that all these things had transpired for me. And as a result, they did. Now, the other piece that many people ask me is about how I decided to do retreats. In fact, I got an email from someone asking me this morning, like, well, how did you make this decision? How did you make this decision? And what I'll tell you is that about a year in, the coaching was actually going great. So I could have just done that. It was all fine. It was all on Zoom because of COVID, had to be. And I enjoyed it. And I had, at that point, had a contract with Stanford, working with the fellowship. I had lots of individual clients. I had even started one group of people, because there were a number of people the first year that had done one-on-one coaching that wanted to do ongoing coaching. And so I started a group for women doctors called Ongoing Presence, where people who had coached with me could continue on coaching. That group has kind of evolved into a newer group called Advanced Coaching, or Deeper Connections, for now people who've come to retreats and or done group coaching, or have done a lot of one-on-one coaching with me, because we go fast and we jump in, but it's all women physicians who've worked with me before. Anyway, it was all fine. And I've landed, again, serendipitously, at a yoga retreat center for a family vacation that was closed because of COVID. And so you could rent it, and it had multiple buildings that worked for families. And we had rented it for Thanksgiving, and someone had gotten COVID. And so it got rescheduled for the spring of 2021. And I didn't even know that I was going to a yoga retreat. We had rented it because it had a pool and it had these 3 separate buildings. And so while I was there, I thought, oh my gosh, like this is set up perfectly. And I also love to tell that, I grew up in a family where my dad did study abroad programs, which was the 1970s and 80s versions of a retreat, where you would take college students abroad. He would actually take them for semesters. He would take them for summers, and they would get credits and things like that. So like continuing education credits, but different. And they came from all over the country. It's actually, eerily similar to what I do. And he arranged a lot of the stuff. So I recognized that for me, this didn't seem at all like a foreign concept. And I had grown up attending these and seeing what worked and what didn't in a different setup, of course, but it didn't seem like a crazy idea. And so I landed there, and again, surreptitiously, a negative thing turned into a positive thing, which was the pool person had put some chemical in the pool, and we couldn't use it. And it was 95 degrees that week, totally out of season weather. And we had actually rented it so my niece could use the pool. And so this was a big disappointment. So the owner came by to talk to us about it. So I asked the owner, like, hey, I know you're a retreat center. I know you're closed for retreats, but if I rented it myself, could I do a retreat? And he said, sure, but it was actually mostly booked. And there was a spot like 6 weeks from then. And so I put in the Mindful Healthcare Collective Facebook group. Who might be interested? It has single rooms. We can do the coaching outside. And I got like 100 people that said they were interested. So 6 weeks later, I did my first retreat, actually only for 6 people, I think, which is, I actually still only do 7 because what I discovered is that's a number where I can still do one-on-one coaching and I can still be authentic and I can really do the work that I do in a way that feels just super meaningful and aligned. It makes me feel alive. It makes the people who come feel alive. And I think for most people, they have never been to anything this small. And it's often something that they absolutely, truly love. And so serendipitously, because I was trying to use only single rooms, et cetera, that's how it played out. And the first retreat was amazing. And so I often say, like, when you get the hit, when you get the idea, whether it's a name for something or just like, this is something I really want to do, why not try it? I did not commit to becoming someone who was going to do retreats. I also, in that moment, there was no possibility of having a caterer because of COVID situations, et cetera. And so sweet Mark agreed to do one retreat, just one. And now he's still doing it 5 years later. But again, it was just like, we'll just see what happens. And the feedback from that retreat was, you have to keep him. And that sort of fed him along for a little while until we finally made the bigger pivot. So I also recognize very clearly that the in-person work made me feel alive. Again, it was that feeling that I was looking for. So following my nose, which in my case is actually following my heart, that's really where my inner wisdom is. And I like you to think like, well, where is it? Is it heart knowing? Is it belly knowing? Is it gut knowing? Where do you feel it? Some people have the knowing in their sacrum. It's actually an embodied knowing, and that embodiment is presence in your body. And so I think if you're willing to see the signs and trust them, whatever they might be for you, and there might just be a sign that you're ready for a change. And remember that I didn't just fall into this. I actually had gotten coached, done coach training, which involves getting a lot of coaching, and continued to work with one coach or another the whole way through. I didn't just do this on my own without support. And I'm going to talk about this later, but support is essential. It's one of the essential ingredients to trusting yourself and following your inner knowing. Because while you're following your own inner knowing, you're having someone else pick up your body cues, which is what I pick up on Zoom or what I pick up when I'm working with people in person. And sometimes it's hard for us to pick that up on our own. So by 2022, another year later, I was super busy because I'd added now the retreats in, and I was doing a lot of coaching, and the world had opened up to some degree. So teams were asking for retreats. I was starting to get asked to go and give talks places. And so I told Mark that I needed to hire someone. And he said, you should hire me. And I thought he was absolutely, completely crazy. And so this is where I just want to point out that, like, I had built something that he actually wanted to be a part of. I hadn't seen that yet for whatever reason in that way. And he was sort of seeing that living a different life was possible. He, and at that point, was working full-time as a lawyer and helping me on the side. So he was really probably doing 1.5 jobs. So he was part of it. He could see the energy. He could see the magic. He could see the wonder. And he would talk about how much good this was doing for the world. Not the coaching, which he really didn't see, but the retreat piece where he saw the coaching in action and he heard people's feedback. But as any good doctor, I was absolutely terrified to take another big step. And so I also was hesitant to, again, go back to being the sole breadwinner and have all that, heaviness and all the things. Or the primary breadwinner, or the one with the salary that made the meaningful difference. So I made it a master coach project because I, at that time, had signed up for master coach training because I always like to learn and grow. And it was denied as my master coach project. I don't actually know why. I think that they thought it was not hard enough. Or they thought maybe it was out of my control, though he was in it. It was actually all my own work, and it was a really hard project for me, like really hard. There what felt like just tremendous risk. I had 3 children relying on us. I had a house in the Bay Area that was not paid for. I had a mortgage. I had all the things. But I decided to do it anyway. Even though I then had to pick another project. And one of the reasons I decided to do it, and I don't tell this story very often, but someone who was actually the leader of the entire master coach training, who is someone who's very high up at the life coach school, sent me a personal email. And she said, we denied this as your project, but you should do it anyway. And I did this in my business, and it was the most amazing thing I've ever done. And she likened some of the things about her husband to my husband and how it had just changed their life, and that it was really hard and it would take a lot of coaching and mindset work and, compromise and work on your marriage along the way, but that she really encouraged me to do it. And her story was very powerful and resonated deeply. And I really did want to do it. And I knew he really wanted to do it, but I had to do some work. So it took about a year to get to that point, at which point I stopped hesitating, and I trusted myself and trusted us. You're not really supposed to work for a spouse. And I've talked a lot recently about that being the best thing that I ever did. And again, just this idea that my trust allowed him to trust himself. It allowed us to trust our marriage. And as that trust and courage grew from within us and in our decision making, the business actually grew exponentially. And so this is the modeling, right? I modeled, then we modeled, and things grew and grew. We modeled the possibilities for other people. And also the retreats literally became just better and better and better and better. So in 2024, this is kind of like an annual thing here, we then made the decision to sell our house and move to Nicasio Creek Farm. And again, originally moving was not our plan. We were not like, we're going to find a retreat center. It actually came up because the original retreat center that I was using, I was their best customer. They loved the work I was doing. They felt like it was so aligned, and so they offered to sell it to us. We were not aligned on price, and as it turned out, there were so many underlying things that wouldn't work: permits, repairs, wild pigs, all kinds of crazy things. Although I really, really loved it, and I really wanted to make it work. But what I came to believe at that point was that this idea, something that hadn't popped into my head, could be done. It could absolutely be done. And so actually I'm thankful now it didn't work out. But where we ended up is so much better. And that location was absolutely beautiful, despite the technical challenges. But where we are is absolutely beautiful. But what about this is better and is so much better is because we created it. And I want to lean into this a little bit because this has come up several times recently. And I think one of the things that many people don't realize is the importance of space and the importance of environment. And so this space was purchased with the intention of doing what we do. It was purchased with that come alive energy. This was going to help us come alive. And again, the ripples were going to help other people come alive. And that when it's a presence that goes beyond your physical body, and it became a property presence and an environment presence that's a felt presence. And while this might sound woo to those of you who have not been on a retreat, almost everyone who comes on a retreat here comments on it. It literally, the place adds potency to the work. And the other retreat place was chosen with intention. It was a very magical place as well. but it didn't have the same magic because, I didn't design the rooms. I didn't design the spaces, and I didn't actually rebuild anything here, save a couple of things. Like we made some minor improvements, but the way that each room is set up and the way that we did ultimately put a yoga deck, and the way that the yoga room was designed, and the spaces where we sit and coach, and all the wind chimes and all of those things, that was by design with literally physician healing in mind, and human healing, and a heart-centered approach. And this is also a very magical space in the world and a magical valley. But, when I got here, there was an inner knowing. I was like, oh, this is the place. And hopefully we can make it work. But it's all about intentional spaces and energy. And so often in medicine, we disregard that because we are asked to. Hospitals are not intentional healing spaces. Medical clinics are not intentional healing spaces. We have a whole podcast about intentional healing spaces in the summer of 2022 with Jennifer Dowling, and I encourage you to take a listen to it. We've referenced it in a couple of recent podcasts. But when you create intentional spaces for healing, the possibilities are just so much bigger and more impactful, and the transformation that can happen is pretty wild. And so I noticed that people who are opening up DPCs, for example, or their own private practices really lean into this. And I think it's important. And they actually fancy like .com, Apple, Google people, they also create more intentional spaces. Now, their spaces are not for healing, they're for innovating, but the spaces, again, are intentional. And in medicine, we don't do that. And so my thought might be, how does this apply to you? Create some intentional spaces at home. Figure out how you feel in certain spaces, what literally physical things make you feel that way. Very often it's a lack of things. It's minimalism. And I believe in mindful minimalism. There are two very early podcasts, or at least one, called Mindful Minimalism, also a great listen. I should touch back on that again in terms of intentional spaces, because I am to some degree a minimalist, not a minimalist where you don't have stuff, but you only have stuff that's meaningful. And if it's not meaningful, the space is actually equally meaningful. So I think that's a value. So one of the other things about this space here is that there's no one else here. So at the other space, there were caretakers, not the owners, but the space wasn't entirely yours. It was mostly yours compared to, say, a resort or a spa. It was a quiet, private space. I think that's absolutely important. And recognizing the energy of other people in your space, again, in your practice, who you work with, that can be critical. Or have a space in your home where it's your own space, where you're not running into other people. It doesn't have to be a huge space, or a space in your backyard where when you're there, your family knows that it's your space. But I think having a space where other people are not there, and a space that's curated by humans in a meaningful way. We do all the gardening, all the cleaning, all the designing. We don't repair fences and build big things because we're not contractors. But the more and more we do these things, the more intentional the space gets, and the more supportive for those people who come. And I want to offer here that when you are in an intentional space, again, your alignment will skyrocket. As mine did, as Mark's did, and the doors and windows literally opened for both of us. And I say that with a little smile on my face, because having a window that opened was one of the things that my heart really truly needed and was missing in my old practice. And I so often talked about the light and the windows. I did have an office with a window, but my exam rooms didn't have windows, and no windows opened. There was no fresh air. And so literally thinking about how can you create spaces where you feel like you have open windows. And I know I'm not alone in that. I have many clients who also talk about the lack of open windows. So the through line here is the right space amplifies the right work. And so think about your spaces at home, think about your spaces at work, think about minimalism, think about intention, think about colors. I had someone in my Martha Beck training program who is doing the coach training, but she actually does colors and color healing. And it's pretty, colors have vibrations and frequencies, and they change your energy, and they open up your mind, and they work on your nervous system. And that sort of loops back to what I do. So paying attention to putting yourself in spaces. And if you're trying to make transitions, that's why travel works. You put yourself in a different space. It's not just uncomfortable, but literally the physical environs may be more supportive to your mindset. So a couple of things I want to share at the end here is that there were things that happened that I did not expect. And I mentioned this up front. Modeling transformation actually transformed my entire family as well as my clients. And so what I built is not actually the biggest thing that happened. It was the change in the people around me. My husband healed even when I began doing this work, before I built it, but watching me decide to come alive and do the work that took. My kids, I worried that it would limit them. We sold and moved away from the house they grew up in, the city they grew up in. Both their parents changed careers. We brought in a ton of uncertainty and risk. And oh my God, it totally, in the end, expanded my kids. My kids believe in possibility. They now have permission to live their biggest life, to trust themselves, to live into who they are, and to create lives that are uniquely theirs. And I say that, and I say it, and I'm like, oh my God, but it's like so true. They are all living very different lives. They're literally like, products of the product. And I didn't necessarily coach them, though I became a parent who embodies all of that. And literally what they have said to me is, if you can change, anybody can change. If you can give up all that, to do what's important, then anybody can. And so what you model is much more powerful than what you say. And so showing my kids the best version of me is been just massively impactful. And I hope that it's massively impactful for my grandkids. And I know that what I do wouldn't be as impactful if I were still, if I weren't in alignment in my own life, if I were still practicing medicine as space, or in the process of change, if that makes sense. And same thing for my husband. Many people say that who've been coming to retreats for years. They're like, wow, it's amazing to see how much he has transformed and lit up, and his food and the way that he cares for people and the energy that he has to do that. And then the other people that I see it in is my clients. Watching other people shift into bigger lives and more aligned careers, and healing their relationships, healing themselves, healing stories. The trust that I model in myself gives them permission to trust themselves. And the possibility that I model gives them possibility. And so there really is a ripple effect. There really is a spread. And I just can't nudge you all enough to consider that. We spend so much time considering the negative what ifs. And I know that it feels a little cliche to say what's possible? But really, what is possible? It's equally possible that than the other. And it's possible that the ripple effects will be way bigger than you expect. So, and the more you lean in, the bigger the results are. That's the other thought at the end, that what I do now has double, triple the energy. People get results faster and bigger, and the energy shifts are just that much bigger. And I know it sounds totally woo, and you don't have to believe it. But those of you who've joined me know that, and the property energy field is adding into it. And so I'm just noticing it. How can I explain it scientifically? I can't, but I'm watching it, and I'm watching it, and I'm watching it, and I wouldn't have believed it myself. And so I just encourage you to really lean into that. Sometimes we don't know what's possible, and to notice also what's working around you, and to lean into it, and doing more is a strategy that I use a lot. The other piece that I wanted to add here is something that's now emerging that hasn't been a part of my journey, or a part of my journey that I was aware of, which is really the spiritual angle. After it really getting to a space where my nervous system feels very aligned, I'm really much more free to sort of explore things on a spiritual level and share the spirituality component of it. And what has come back to me is many comments about my TED Talk and people talking about how I'm a vessel. And this idea, it all comes through religious lenses, which I find interesting because I was raised an atheist. And, I think what I'm seeing is that it's not just science-based, it's also spiritual. There's this art of healing, and it's the art that we lost in medicine and the art of practice. And it's what people in the world are craving right now. It's what we're missing right now. I think it's maybe what was pulled out of medicine when it has become so institutionalized. And nature is spiritual. There are literally parts of the trees around here that are called the cathedral trees. The light is a spiritual thing. Think about all the stained glass windows. And so while this is done in a non-denominational way, and I think some people think like mindfulness is contradictory to religion, and I would say no, it's like there's a synergy, and it's really about power and healing and magic. And I've had some really interesting conversations with people about this, and it's a spot that I'm really just beginning to explore, like the possibility through that lens. And there has to be something there, just like ancient wisdom and ancient medicine. If we've been doing it for millions of years, there's something to it that makes a difference and does something. And I think that's true for spirituality as well. And so the power when you put all this stuff together is pretty magic. And that, I think, has really led to me doing things like this TED Talk and the What Would Love Do. And, my What Would Love Do is my version of Mel Robbins' Let Them, I think, except it's more loving. How's that? And this idea of the love for self and love for the greater world. And also the and. It's not an or, it's an and. And it immediately grounds your nervous system, especially if you put your hand on your heart and close your eyes. If you listen to the TED Talk, you'll hear all the directions. And it's the thing that really works in the moments that rip you apart. And it worked for me in those moments of big decisions. Once again, it's something I live and something I model. It's something I used with my teenagers who are now young adults. It's something I've used with the birth of my grandkids. And it works in big and little moments. It can work as a leader in an institution. And so what I would say is, while I've taught that for years, putting it out on a TED Talk stage was a really pivotal moment, and being visible in that way has added to my confidence. And I often say, people say, how did you have the confidence to do it? You never have the confidence to do something like that. You grow the confidence by doing it. It's the practice. And so, I think it's the most portable, most potent thing that I teach. And when you live by it, that's how other people experiencing it. So think about, what are you living by? What are you modeling? What are the things that you preach and teach? And do you actually live them yourself? And so an encouragement to trust the process. Remember that medicine told you not to trust yourself. But when you trust yourself, you get potency, impact, alignment, aliveness. The world doesn't collapse when you follow your inner knowing. It expands. And as you develop the capacity to navigate the world with grace, compassion, ease, and love, like crazy things can happen. And so I'm hoping that this podcast gives you the nudge to trust your inner knowing. And I also hope that it gives you the nudge to trust the clues, and then to look back and say what worked and why, and learn from that. And that is where I've kind of now recognized that I do have a methodology. I do have sort of a magnum opus of the way that these things have come together. And now I can define and explain it. But so many of you ask me for the methodology up front. And my thought is, like, it comes through the process. And so if you allow yourself to be there, let those permeable membranes be a little bit permeable, the end result is something that you never thought possible. The end result is moving energy efficiently. It's less confusion. It's trusting, and life can literally be fun, and amazing things can happen. They are not exclusive. We don't have to suffer to make amazing change and be a guiding light. And lastly, find support. That is how you trust your inner knowing to start. You can grow trust in it. I trust it much more now. I need a lot less support, but I needed one to get from my medical mindset to this mindset. And, I dipped a toe in. I borrowed belief from other people. I continue to borrow belief from people when I need it, whether it's my current coach, Ni Chang, the podcast co-host, my husband, my kids, my former yoga teacher. There are people out there, and so find the people who can support you and allow them to do it. Let them support you. We deflect it. I can do it myself. It's that toxic independence. And so allowing that sort of space for support, giving yourself permission for support is magic. So lastly, a few reflection questions. What would all this look like in your life? Who would you be if you trusted yourself? What's possible? What from this conversation resonated, sparked an interest, sparked your curiosity? Where might you like to start? And noticing also that this did not happen overnight. It was not a big elaborate plan. It was this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Where might you just be open to the progression and the shifts? So it's not selfish to show up as your best self. And the ripple effects of trusting your inner knowing are actually what the world needs right now. The world needs us to trust our inner knowing and follow it. Every piece where you trust yourself, the next piece will come from that. It's step by step by step by step. And the people around you, the ones you're most worried about, they will likely get to live a bigger life because you did. Your family, your patients, your loved ones, everyone that you meet anywhere and everywhere. What you model is much more powerful than what you say. And when you trust your inner knowing, you also give other people permission to trust theirs. And the life on the other side is so much more fun, more aligned, more potent. And so I encourage you that if this resonates with you, reach out, join a retreat, start by starting, trust yourself, trust the nudge. You won't regret it. You'll learn something. And it's sort of like that little nudge, the little shove out of the mud. And once you're going, it gets better and better and better and better. So a lot of people say, well, what do I do first? Doesn't matter. You can do one-on-one coaching, then you can come to a retreat. You can come to a retreat. You can do one-on-one coaching. You can start with a group. It's literally start by starting. And that's kind of what I did. I spun around for 2 years. What should I do? What should I do? And then I just did something, and it all unfolds from there. So I literally can't wait to hear your stories. And as you all know, I do share many of your stories on the podcast. And so I would love to share more stories of like this to inspire other people. What you model is much more powerful than what you say. So nothing in this podcast is medical advice. As usual, you can find links to retreats, coaching, yada, yada, yada on my website. And I thank you all so, so, so much for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening. If our message resonates, we'd love to connect further. Join us for coaching, mindfulness experiences, workshops, and retreats. Invite us to speak at your institution or conference. When you work with us, you don't just consume information, you create real change. Find me, Chang Liang, at Awakened Breath, and Jessie Mahoney at Pause and Presence.
Welcome to today's mindful moment. Today we'll practice checking in, connecting with your inner knowing, and connecting with this idea of embodiment. Taking a moment to see, where do you have that knowing? And so as we begin, if it's safe to do so, close your eyes. And if not, don't. And reconnect to your breath, breathing in through your nose and out through your mouth. Another big breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. And take a moment to notice where you are sitting or standing. Soles of the feet on the floor, maybe your sit bones on the chair, connecting into the earth in whatever way you are. Maybe your seat is connected to the car seat. Either way, just notice. And if it's available, bring both hands to heart, hand on heart. Checking in with your heart space. slowing your breath down and taking a moment to listen. Noticing what you know. Notice what wisdom is in that heart space. For some of you, there may be an immediate connection, and for others of you, it feels distance. You're not sure what the message is. And I invite you again, if you're not driving, to take the top hand and put it on your belly, hand to heart, hand to belly. Noticing different information there, perhaps. Once again, drawing your attention back to the rise with the inhale and the fall with the exhale. And then again, if you're not driving, bringing both hands to belly, and we'll take 3 breaths here. Checking in to notice what you notice, any wisdom or information there. You might even try your hands below your belly button, over the sacral chakra, the lower pelvic region, or maybe over your solar plexus, the belly button region, a diamond around your belly. Play with it and see what you know. Bringing your hands back to your heart. Coming back to the breath, eyes still closed if possible, but not if it's unsafe. Once again, checking in for wisdom and inner knowing. And for those of you who wish, and it's safe to do so, you can bring both palms over your eyes, shutting out the light, creating a connection between the forehead. And notice what wisdom you have there. If with eyes closed, not a lot of pressure on the eyes, but pressure more on the forehead, is there knowing there? Coming back to the breath. And just notice what you notice. And when you're ready, bringing hands back to heart. Taking a moment to let whatever wisdom that is there be seen, tucking it into that space behind your heart to carry with you. And if you weren't able to connect to that wisdom yet, let this be a practice of dropping into your body and trying to listen in different spaces. You might find that you listen best in nature. You might find that your body gives its biggest clues in child's pose. You might find that your body does well when you put your head down on a block on your desk. There are so many options. Think about the places and spaces where you have inner knowing. In a recent podcast, we talked about the spaces where you have curiosity, but where are the spaces where you just know what you know, deep inside? Reconnecting to the information and wisdom that your body has. It keeps the score, it carries the trauma, and it carries the wisdom, the knowing. You and your body are on this journey together. You can trust one another if you choose. So with that, take one more deep breath and exhale. And lower your hands and open your eyes and let the light in. Take a moment to accommodate. And as I sign off, take another couple moments just to sit with yourself, being with yourself, knowing what you know, noticing what you notice. Have an amazing week, and we'll see you next week.